we'll just kick it off.
I
Austin,
guess, yeah,
how's
we're
it?
just kicking it off.
Yeah.
We're just going.
All right. Okay. So I want to start with just saying hi to the audience. It's been a few weeks, few months that we haven't recorded. So welcome back to a new and refurbished go-to-market news show. So GTMN.fm. And Austin and I took some time off and thought about how we can add more value to the audience and also to ourselves, and came up with a new way of going about the show. So we're excited to share the first episode, which is a deep dive on all things CRM. So you'll notice in the next couple of episodes how this works, but we do deep dives on particular categories, particular domains, and we're starting with what we think is the most important in the go-to-market space, and that is,
CRM.
inevitably CRM. Exactly. So,
Yep.
Austin, welcome back. It feels so good to be recording again.
I know. It's funny. So folks who are listening, we've had a couple weeks where Pranav and I have been scheming together. But yeah, like it felt like every week in the spring was just another news show about AI. And AI is very important to what's happening in go-to-market, but there's also other stuff happening. So from time to time, we will shoot the shit about, what's happening with AI. But hopefully we just won't spend the entire time talking about what's changed. And I feel like, I don't know if you experienced this, Pranav, but I feel like at the same time that you and I were feeling that way about the podcast, I was also feeling that way about like LinkedIn and feeling kind of overgrinded by the hype wheel of social media. So I've actually been off of social media, haven't been on LinkedIn. And I still have like posts that go out. And this is not for this episode, but I feel like we should talk about it at some point. The irony of like, hey, I am no longer on social media, but I am posting on it because I know that's the way that you create an audience. But I've recognized like how destructive it is to my mental health. So yeah.
There is definitely an irony there, Austin, and I know exactly what you mean, and it takes a lot to just be. I was talking to actually a friend of mine over the weekend, and one of the things we were saying is like how to be successful with digital media these days, you kind of have to be online, like chronically online, right, to be part of the conversations, and how that can be extremely taxing. So balancing it with some time off and detox is amazing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's kick this off. So CRM, and I actually want to start with a very simple question. Why do we even need a CRM, Austin? Why are customer relationships this important, and what's really going on? Why has that become the center of every business's strategy and operations? And yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? But before we even go down the path of like what happened with Oracle and Siebel and Salesforce, we have lots of interesting tidbits to cover.
Yeah. It's so funny because I hear so many, call it AI CRM companies, talking about putting the relationship back in the R of CRM. Like, I don't know, man. I think a lot of companies out there are not really putting in relationships in the way that Salesforce originally intended it. If you go back like 30, 40 years, so my dad was a commercial real estate agent, and he had a Rolodex thing on his desk, which had people's names and phone numbers. And over the course of his career, like he built that Rolodex. It was a bunch of people who he knew, who he interacted with. And you have to put yourself back in like the time of technology then. You might meet somebody and you get their phone number, but you can't text them. You can't email them. You don't, wasn't really widely deployed until the late 90s. You can't email them. Maybe you have their address. Maybe you send them cards. But you think about you meet people and you grow your network very slowly and organically. And the only way that you can maintain that network is through organization. And to me, that's like the first version of the CRM was your brain. The second version of your CRM was a notebook. The third version has been a Rolodex. The fourth version is a database. And the fifth version is Salesforce. And then I think about like what it means to have a relationship then versus now. Now I feel like relationships are often very transactional. And so I don't even think the R in relationship is correct. It's kind of like lowercase r.
Yeah.
Whereas relationship, 20 years ago was definitely the capital case R.
You can tell the generation in which somebody grew up when you hear them ask about your family and what was the last vacation. Oh, hey, you went to Cabo. How was Cabo? Right? Like there's you actually care about the other person more than just what your CRM says about that person, And
Totally.
so,
And
and
Pranav, I don't know if you feel this way, and I'll shut up after this because I want us to conquer the right material, but I actually think there's almost like two versions of CRMs these days. There's like the non-personal LinkedIn version of CRM, and then there's the deeply personal version. And I find myself often struggling to balance between like what is company level data versus person level data. And a great
Mm.
example is, the first person I worked with at Branch was a guy named John Joe Smith, and I'm like really good friends with him, and he has his own company, and he would have been in my Rolodex back in the day. And
Mhm.
I'm sure you have that too. Your first couple of jobs, you have people who you gravitate towards and you keep with you for the rest of your life. And those are the R in CRM in my mind. But then there's this other category of like people I've met online, people I went to dinner with, people who I received an email from, people I had one call with. And, that's just a function of how quick our world moves and how many relationships we interact with. Like I said before, my dad also wasn't on Zoom calls for 12 hours a day, meeting 12 different people. So we just have like way more people that we interact with, but not all. They're all relationships, but they're also not all the same times of relationships. So I think that that's the challenge that our CRMs are trying to accomplish today. And I don't think any of them
Totally.
have done it very well, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so fun question for you. When do you think Rolodexes were invented?
Oh my gosh.
So the answer
If
is
I was
1956.
gonna
I'm gonna
say like Mad Men, right? They had the
Yeah,
secretaries had them on there.
that's right. So 1956, these, Rolodexes and then index cards, and people had their personal planners and what have you. Now, what's interesting is I think back in that day, your Rolodex was everything, right? Your network was your
Oh yeah.
net worth, where if you walked out as a salesperson from an organization, your Rolodex was the biggest valuable asset that you brought into a company. And
Mhm.
that has fundamentally shifted and changed. And, a couple of things while researching for this episode that I also realized, it seems like corporate lifespans have shrunk like remarkably. So the S&P 500, the corporate lifespan was about like 33 years in 1965, and it's 20 years by 1990, and it's going to be 12 years by 2027. Like,
Mm.
this is wild. So the premise is that, hey, if you do customer relationship management well, you can actually extend your lifespan. I don't know if I can agree or disagree. Maybe this is just like, the
Mhm.
technology landscape is just like continuously having to reinvent yourself, and, disruption happening to every corporate. But that's the whole premise of a CRM is, can you build long-term relationships with your customers that, span then multiple decades and what have you. Okay, couple of other things I want to start with. So we all talk about Salesforce as the main, story in this whole CRM sort of space. But I found it fascinating to realize that there were multiple companies who were massive before Salesforce even started. So let's talk about a couple of them. Did you know that Siebel was doing 2 billion in revenue in 1999 or 2000 before Salesforce even started?
Not 2 billion.
2 billion. They had 45% market share back then. And yeah, they were just absolutely crushing. And the story of how Siebel even got started is really interesting. So Tom Siebel, who started Siebel, was actually at Oracle before that. And so Oracle is also known as like the Xerox PARC of CRM, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah. I remember
Tom
that.
Siebel came out of Oracle, and so did obviously the CEO of Salesforce. And apparently Siebel built this thing called OASIS inside of Oracle. It was called Oracle Automated Sales Information System. So that was the beginning of, what he noticed is like, hey, we're selling all these databases at Oracle, and, maybe there should be a database that's like all about customer relationships. And that's how and then he quit Oracle and then he started Siebel, and it was all on-prem. So Siebel, lasted between 1993 and 2004 when it got back by Oracle. But Siebel was an on-prem CRM and built all of the primitives of modern CRM. So the contact object, the opportunity, the concept of a pipeline, stages,
Can I
forecasting, all of
can I
this was done by Siebel.
can I comment for a second and laugh at the fact that we're now going back to on-prem with AI people writing crap to their local disk? Like,
Indeed,
technically, everybody
indeed.
is on-prem now because all these founders are building their own CRMs through like the Notes app or Obsidian on their local desktop. Anyways, I'm
Or the
sorry.
fact that you have a mini Mac Mini, or a server
Oh
sitting
yeah,
in your
I have mine, Gary. He's sitting over there. He's right next to me.
There we go. There we go. Kind of fascinating. But then I realized that even before Siebel, there were a few companies that were really interesting. So there was a company called Act, which was, I think it was Automated Contact Tracking. That was the
Oh,
name of
yeah.
the company.
I remember ACT.
And the founders behind these companies were like looking at the predominant sort of PC software back then. Lotus 123, which was basically spreadsheets, WordPerfect, which was word processing, and apparently there was this thing called DBase. I don't think I ever interacted with DBase, but
Mm-mm.
databases like that. So you had spreadsheets, you had word processing, you had databases,
I remember
but none of them
WordPerfect for
were.
sure, though.
Yes,
Oh
yes,
my
and
god.
none of these were built for relationships. So these couple of guys, Mike Money and Pat Sullivan, were both career salespeople, and basically decided to start this company called Act. And so that was like, and then there was GoldMine in the 1989s and the early 90s. There was Maximizer. There was a bunch of other companies, and none of them really cracked it until Siebel came around. And that's another thing, like being first to market didn't really matter for that whole category. And I wonder if the same thing is going to be true in the current space. We'll cover this in the next episode about what's happening with AI CRM. But I don't think the first ones that are entering the market are necessarily going to be the ones that last. So really interesting history of what happened with Act, GoldMine, and then eventually Siebel. And none of us probably even remember any of this, right? Because we weren't around. But some more interesting parts about Siebel that I think are very telling. So their entire go-to-market was completely built on network. Sorry, what I mean by network is channel. So they had a certified consultants program in 1998. So Accenture, PwC, IBM, they were the ones who were actually implementing Siebel. Nobody at Siebel was doing the implementations themselves. And then okay, here's another one. Tom Siebel wrote 3 books as an author in 6 years in the late 90s. So he was also a really good marketer. He knew what he was doing, This whole idea of like thought leadership is not new by any means, right?
Nope.
These people talking about, hey, you need to be writing on LinkedIn every day. Hey, guess what? People were doing that in the 90s in their own way, right?
It's called
Publishing
writing
books.
books, though.
Probably
And
more
there was no
authoritative.
AI, Pranav.
Yes, exactly. So completely channel-based, really large enterprise licenses. So they were doing $1 million deals back then. And 50% of their revenue was reinvested back in sales and marketing. So, okay, here's another one. It was the fastest growing company in America in the late 90s.
I mean, 2 billion.
Yep. It was
Big
a
business for the
very interesting
90s.
time. Yeah. And it's no longer a thing anymore, which is kind of wild. Okay.
Well, I mean, what's fascinating too, so we've covered basically up to almost 1999, and nowhere in the discussion so far have we talked about Salesforce.
Nope.
And I think that's like an interesting part of this story is how so much of the category existed and the concept existed before the largest player in the world was ever invented. Not to mention the second largest player wouldn't come out for another 10 years. And on top of that, it wouldn't even enter the space for another 13 or 15, which is HubSpot.
That's exactly right. Okay, so now we enter, 2000, 2001. There's a whole sort of, reimagination of Silicon Valley that's going on. I think Siebel started to kind of suffer a little bit because if you kind of pair all of these things together, right? They were on-prem, they were going after enterprise. They had grown quite a bit on the premise that like this whole internet business is going to take off and drive even more growth. And so they really started to struggle. And a few things that were also coming up, none of this is like a surprise, but like they were built for the buyer, not for the user. So they were really optimizing for IT and managers, but not really able to, build for the end user, because you can also imagine end users didn't have really good technology back then. The on-premise burden was like real. There wasn't really any mobile. I mean, the browser was just about coming out, right? So they hadn't really figured out what to do with the browser. And then when the crash happened, it became really hard to justify these large investments into CRM because what's the ROI, right? So, okay, fast forward to March of 1999, and I didn't even realize this happened all in SF, but Marc Benioff, who was apparently the youngest ever VP at Oracle, decides to enter the game. And what's fascinating is he basically goes out and says, do you remember seeing these like end of software logos everywhere? Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
we'll put them in the podcast so you can see what I'm talking about. But he just went completely against Siebel and said, hey, you can't be doing on-prem, you have to do cloud. We are building entirely on cloud. And he called it the end of software. And oh, hey, guess what? 2026, we're also talking about the end of software, but not in the same ways. But what an interesting parallel to what was going on back then to what is happening now, right? Like completely reimagining the world. So that was, and then, this happened in 99. They went to IPO in 2003 or 2004. So
Mm.
that was also wild. Like within 5 years, dude. Like that is wild. That is very much like the big AI companies nowadays, right? You launch and you have a massive exit or an IPO. And then a year later, Siebel sells to Oracle. So what a fascinating story and time it must have been to be alive. But yeah, so that's the history of Salesforce. We'll talk a little bit more about it and why they won. Yeah. Reactions, thoughts from your end on this, story?
Well, I think we'll be getting to this in the second episode with Salesforce, but I feel like the story of Siebel is kind of being first. The story of Salesforce in my mind is being really, really good at marketing. So much that so there's an example that I like to pull from Lenny's podcast, which I knew about previously, which is where Marc Benioff did this outrageous thing at a conference in front of Siebel. He hired a bunch of actors and they pretended to, be protesting Siebel. And I know you have notes on many of the other outrageous tasks that he did, but I just think that gets lost from this story so much is that, it was never preordained that Salesforce was going to win. And think about how many businesses out there now where it's very obvious what's happening in the preordainment. I mean, VCs pay for preordainment. They give businesses a ton of money to, crowd control the marketing efforts of their brand and anoint themselves as the primary and dominant player. And I would argue that the reason why maybe Siebel lost and the reason why Salesforce ended up winning partially was to do with timing, partially to do with some of the facts that you laid out, the fact that on-prem was dying and cloud was rising. Siebel could have pivoted, they could have built a product. But I think a lot of it has to do with killer marketing. And so I think about that constantly with AI today of how many businesses are being developed and might have better technology, but the one that's going to end up winning is frankly just better marketed.
What's really interesting? Like the notes I have on Salesforce's marketing efforts. So you're entirely right about the guerrilla sort of marketing efforts. Fun one. They created a fake news channel to show up at Moscone outside the Siebel conference, right? So this
Oh
is
my,
just epic trolling.
yeah.
So so
But
that happened.
think about startup founders today and how many of them would do that. I would call it less than 1%, less than 0.01%. Founders are not willing to take the risk that Benioff took. It
Totally.
was an insane amount of marketing risk. In
Totally.
my compared to today's standards, where people are like, "Hey, I want to grow. What paid channels can I do?" And everybody's regurgitating the same old kind of crap,
Yep.
right? And yet, all the examples that you're going to lay out are
But
outrageous in my mind.
they're outrageous and they're also so epic, right? It's like
Hmm.
the last 20 years, people have been trying to recreate that, guerrilla stunt that these guys did. And then they threw, this is only about a year after their founding. They do another party. They call it the End of Software Launch Party in 2000. And they have 1,500 guests at this party. And they're throwing out software disks in bins. And then, okay, this is also wild. They have an event at Cannes. Now, this is, we talk a lot about Cannes in the marketing and the ad tech
Oh
space.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Apparently, Siebel had an event at Cannes, and again, Salesforce, rented every taxi at the airport and branded them no software. So it's everything that they could do, they were doing. And then, but I do think that there is an important distinction. Apparently, they figured out how to sell to the rep and not to the buyer, and this was also only possible because of the internet, right? So you could go
Mm,
to Salesforce.com and swipe your credit card and buy Salesforce just for yourself. You never had to go through your manager or your IT team or your CEO.
yeah.
So there was this much bigger distribution advantage that they had, and they rode it, really, really well. Okay, this is also kind of crazy. 4 years after they got founded, they had their first Dreamforce. Dreamforce happened in 2003 for the first time, which is wild, right?
Hmm.
So it's just so the guerrilla marketing, the, direct to prosumer distribution, the community, from the very beginning with Dreamforce, you think about all of these different things and you realize why they won. Like you're stating, right? They really knew how to do marketing really well, and nobody else was even in the same ballpark. Maybe Google was the only other company at that point in the tech space that was doing this.
100%.
Okay. So what's also fascinating to me is that Salesforce pricing was in the early days only about $65 per user per month. They were very SMB. And even
Though, what in
enterprise was
today's
like,
dollars, that's like 120.
okay, fine. Yeah, exactly. And enterprise was like 125 bucks. Whereas Siebel at that time was charging 6 and 7 figure upfront licenses. And then they had like maintenance contracts and what have you. And so Salesforce didn't start in the enterprise. They actually started in small and mid-sized businesses. And it was all like salespeople and selling directly to like the sales team. And very, very self-service. People also forget, like people, we think about Salesforce as like being entirely like enterprise. It was actually, I think they had a self-serve trial process very early on in the business, which is kind
Mhm.
of wild. And okay, this is also wild. They started AppExchange in 2005. This
Crazy.
is this is before the App Store from the iPhone, right? We all think about like the App Store as the defining moment of when like the app ecosystem started. They had AppExchange before the iPhone and the App Store ecosystem on the iPhone. And 8,000 developers signed up to be on Salesforce's AppExchange in 2005.
Wow, that's wild. 8,000?
Can you believe that? Like that's for a company that's like 6 years old.
Yeah, I mean, would I be curious though, and I don't know if you have the stats, like, what were revenues then?
So they went from 5 million in 2001. So this is also wild, right? They went 0 to 5 million in about a couple of years. And then they, what? This is unbelievable. They 10x. They went from 5 million to 51 million in 2003. So in 2 years, they 10x the business. And then they doubled again in 2004 and they IPO'd. So when they IPO'd, they had about, 100 million in revenue.
That used to be the old standard for an IPO-based business.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the stock popped like 56% on day one. So, like, I think about Salesforce and it's like it was like such a good story from a venture perspective back in that environment. And
Mhm.
you would argue, like, even today, if you think about, like, are there companies that are going, 10x in 2 years? Like, I know, like, you have a lot more data on this, but like, if I'm a thinking, and we're taking a little bit of a tangent, if I'm thinking about a go-to-market tech company in the current day and age, you have to be thinking about going 5x, 10x in a year or two for you to be able to raise, Series A, Series B. And
Sure.
and it seems like there is a very clear precedence for that in Salesforce, which is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there was no hype cycle back then to support a business raising hundreds of millions of dollars without making any money, you know? That's very
Yeah.
much a modern day concoction of having, too much available cash.
Yeah. Okay, so now we come to Salesforce has gone IPO. The third big name in this category hasn't even entered, right? So we're talking about HubSpot.
They
It's
only enter for another
2006.
10 years, right?
No. So they started in 2006. So a couple of years after Salesforce
Okay.
IPO'd, and
With a
so
CRM
Brian.
offering though, or just marketing?
No, very good point. So the first offering was not CRM. It was just called inbound marketing software for small businesses. So
Yep.
blogging, SEO, landing pages, lead gen tools. They had the website grader, which apparently was like really popular back then.
Oh yeah.
And the CRM did not come until 2014. So
That's what I
another eight
remember.
years after that. That's right. That's exactly right.
I think of it 8 years after that, 11 years after Salesforce IPO'd.
That's right. And if you take a giant step back, like I was looking at the market share today, what's really interesting is HubSpot is still not in the top five of the CRM market. So
What are the top five,
Microsoft,
Pranav? You got to tell us now.
okay, so Microsoft,
Dynamics?
uh, yeah, Microsoft Dynamics, massive.
Mhm.
Adobe, apparently, I don't even know like if Adobe plays in the CRM space.
Oh yeah.
I gotta check that out a little bit more. SAP is massive. Oracle is still pretty big. So Oracle still has 4% market share.
Mm.
So yeah, HubSpot is not in there. So it's Salesforce, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, and Adobe.
Yeah, that's Adobe's Experience Cloud, right?
Yes, but I didn't know that they had like a traditional CRM. Maybe we were just getting that wrong. We'll dig into that in the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating is like I almost feel like we often think about CRM as a very particular type of product. Like you think of the B2B and software enterprise business, which is tracking companies and people, but there are like massive businesses that need CRMs. both for what I would consider like the consumer side of the business, as well as really intricate vendor type management relationship. Like an example is Coca-Cola, right? Coca-Cola needs a CRM. Their CRM is basically custom software. Many of the names that you listed on that top 5 list are frameworks, but really it's a lot of custom software.
Oh, you know what's interesting? Coca-Cola is such an interesting company. I was talking to somebody who used to work there, and the way Coca-Cola is, okay, complete tangent, but I think it's a fun one. They have bottling companies. So every region is a bottler,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they are the ones who are so I actually think Coca-Cola has a big B2B arm. You see what I'm saying? Where you have
Hmm.
like all these bottlers and distributors, and those are the people, and it's all the relationship management between them and the retail stores. So the bottler in, the California region is going to have relationships with the Targets, the Walmarts, the Costcos, all the grocery stores and what have you. And so there is a B2B element to it, but there's also a consumer element to it. So we should do a deep dive on two different categories, right? So there's the marketing automation and life cycle and that whole sort of, that which is very much an adjacency to the CRM in the way that we're talking about it today. And then also
Hmm.
the e-commerce category, right? Or the commerce category. And that's another adjacency where it's not just the relationship, but also the commerce transactions and what have you. So those will be fun episodes to do. But coming back to HubSpot, right? So they start as inbound marketing, completely free at the top of the funnel. So it was all like freemium stuff, very much selling to the SMB and the mid-market. And eventually they launched their CRM coincidentally the same year as they went IPO. So they went IPO in 2014, and then they launched their CRM at the same time. And for a while, and by then, Salesforce had become true enterprise, right? So you had Salesforce going into the enterprise. So the thought was like, hey, HubSpot's gonna like just come on and take over SMB and mid market, but it hasn't been necessarily that way. What's your take? Like, why has HubSpot not really cracked the code and grew as much as Salesforce has?
Well, I mean, it's a classic story. I would argue that it's hard to be great at everything in product software. It's easier to be good at the few things that you're known for. And if you think about what HubSpot is known for in the DNA of the company, they were always building tools for small and medium-sized businesses to take what used to live in 20 different tools and do it in one. And actually, I can't remember if it was Dharmesh or the CEO of HubSpot. They talked about this in some of their quarterly reports as well as their S1 filing. They talked about this idea of building like a growth hub or a growth stack. And the whole thought process was we're going to take lots of disparate solutions and we're going to fulfill like 80% of the value that somebody would have to go get if they were to buy this solution off the shelf. But by combining these together into these hubs, that's why it's called HubSpot, we'll be able to capture more enterprise value because people will buy HubSpot because we check all the boxes rather than just one. And that has a very specific outcome. You are, a master of none, right? Like HubSpot is great for lots of things, but businesses often outgrow them because they're not a master of many things. And actually, what's funny enough is I find in all the enterprise that I've worked with that have really big HubSpot implementations, the thing that keeps them there is actually email marketing because email marketing is
Mm.
actually very hard to change. It's not an easy transformation project. Changing SEO tools, changing landing page tools, especially now with AI, very easy. Even with AI, though, changing email marketing solutions is very complicated because of the underlying process of like warming up IPs and setting those senders to be available. Then you have templates, then you have workflows. There's a lot of connected pieces to making that solution work properly. And because of that, it's hard to escape. And I think on Salesforce's side, they have a little bit of the opposite problem. I think they've mostly just tried to acquire themselves into being a product company. You even said
Mm.
it, Marc Benioff wasn't necessarily a product guy. I think he's known as a marketing and sales expert, but he's not a product and engineering expert. And that certainly shows in how long it's taken them to catch up on having an enterprise product that's, good. That's why I think actually, not to make this about today, but we will talk about this from time to time, the relationship today. I think that AI and the idea of a headless CRM was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to Salesforce.
Mm.
And I don't think people really saw this coming. I know I certainly didn't. My expectation 2 years ago was that, it would just take them so long to catch up that other AI companies would probably have the ability to build not only a great user interface, but also build the APIs and the type of headless experiences that developers would want. The great irony of all this is that AI is really, really good at reading code. And guess who has documented a lot of code on how Salesforce works themselves? Like their
Yeah.
community is really insane. And that actually dates back to what you first talked about with those 8,000 developers coming on to implement Salesforce. So it's fascinating in a way that like the thing that used to, I think, was causing them a lot of pain and maybe slowing them down has suddenly become such a well of advantage in my mind.
It's kind of wild because you think about Salesforce Einstein. I used to make fun of it or just be like,
Oh
what the
yeah.
heck is Einstein, right? I
Oh
think they
yeah.
launched it in 2015 or 2016 is the first time Einstein got released to the outside world. It was not productized, but like they were definitely thinking about it. So even though Benioff is not sort of a product slash engineering minded leader, he surrounded himself with the right folks to see ahead of the curve a little bit. I don't know if they got lucky, but it was interesting. Okay, so the thing that was interesting to me, like as we were kind of going through this recap of the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, think about it this way. It started with like box software. It's weird to even use that term, but like box software, right? CDs. Then
Yep.
you had Siebel with, using the channel, using SIs and consulting firms to kind of do the distribution. Then you had Salesforce, where you finally had a CRM that you could use in a browser, and they actually had a free trial, self-serve, selling to the salesperson. And then you had HubSpot come in with the content flywheel and freemium, and they started giving away CRM completely for free as a wedge to buy the full HubSpot platform. So that's like the trajectory, the eras of what's happened with distribution on the CRM side. And my take here is if you build better and better software for the end user and you are really good at marketing, you can build a winning solution, right? In whichever category it is, right? Whether it's CRM, whether it's marketing, whether it's e-com, you pick. But that's my sort of big lesson from just studying the history of this category.
Yeah. Can't do it all. Got to pick.
Okay, so on the next episode, we've set this up really nicely. We're going to talk about what happens when AI enters the ecosystem, and we'll cover sort of the early sort of work that Salesforce and HubSpot did in the AI space, what's happening right now. And on that note, you're going to love this one. There was an announcement that I read this morning from the founder of this company called Artisan. Have you heard of Artisan?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so for people who don't know what Artisan is, they had these billboards all around the Bay Area, and I'm sure in New York as well, that said, don't hire humans because AI is better or what have you, right? And that they're like very controversial, edgy, like in your face, this narrative that humans are lazy and AI can sell better. And they were selling this AI SDR. This year, I saw a LinkedIn post just randomly on my feed that, oh, we've changed our mind. We're completely going in the opposite direction. And we no longer believe in AI as a replacement of humans. We think it's going to be humans powered by AI. So no better sort of, stopping point for us to pause. And then we can talk about what's happening with AI and CRM and the category in the next episode.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we did a great job getting to where CRM circa 2015 to 2020 is. And now we get to talk about where it's gone.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Couple of things before I truly close it out. We did not talk about a couple of really interesting companies. Have you heard of Zoho?
Oh, of course. Who hasn't heard of Zoho?
Well, okay. They're bootstrapped. They're profitable. They're top 5 by customer count. So, but we don't talk about it at all. So fascinating CRM story, because Zoho CRM, I think, was their first product, if I'm not wrong. And then the other one is Veeva. Have you heard of Veeva? I don't know much about them, but apparently they are a CRM for the healthcare space. Is that right?
Healthcare space. That's right.
And
Massive business.
They were built on top of Salesforce, and then they built their own stack. So they didn't even start as like owning the full stack. They were built on top of Salesforce. So a couple of other interesting companies, but there's so much to talk about in the next episode. Austin, this is going to be a fun new series. And folks, tune in next week. We'll cover AI and CRM.
Thanks for having me, Pranav. See y'all next week.